She's just a woman digging up the past because she's got no future. That's what they said on a microphone in front of the whole town. But what if the past she's unearthing isn't just hers? And what if it holds the truth that powerful men have killed to bury one well? One missing man, and one single mom who refuses to be silent any longer. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The line at the water station twisted across the dry lot like a spine left too long in the sun. People waited with empty jugs, dented coolers, even rusted buckets, any vessel that might carry what the earth no longer offered. Dust clung to their jeans, their boots, their throats. The sign above the spigot flickered in the wind. The letters, hand-painted names, must match the list. One fill per week, no exceptions. Mara Elwood kept to the far edge, arms folded, boots half buried in powdery soil. A scuffed blue cooler rested beside her, its lid cracked. No one greeted her. No one even nodded, and she had long stopped expecting them to. From the head of the line, a voice called out names. Thompson, Vasquez, Halbrook. Mara stayed still. Her name hadn't been spoken in 3 weeks. The man with the clipboard glanced up once, saw her, and then looked past as if she were just another container waiting to be filled. She could have argued, had thought about it more than once. But there were mothers holding babies, families with leaking roofs. No one cared to hear a widow complain of thirst. A gust tugged at her hair, and she turned her face into her shoulder. Something brushed her leg. She looked down. A dog. Not one she recognized from any yard or porch in Silver Hollow. Its coat, once white, was streaked with dried blood along the side. Lean but not feral, it sat watching her, one paw lifted slightly, as if it knew pain, but refused to voice it. "Hey," she whispered, surprised at the rasp of her own voice. "Where'd you come from?" The animal rose and threaded through the crowd, unflinching, never begging. At the edge, it paused and looked back. Mara blinked. A man shoved a bucket behind her. "Move if you're not on the list," he muttered. She picked up her cooler, dust puffing off the plastic like old chalk, and followed. The dog had slipped through a narrow gap between the trucks beyond the line, beyond the smell of rust and chlorine. Not hurrying, simply moving with certainty. Mara skirted the edge of the lot, boots crunching over cracked gravel as the voices around the spigot faded. The dog waited by the fence, tail still, eyes steady. She didn't call to it. The dog moved on, weaving toward the rusted trailers beside the town square. Mara followed, keeping to the shadows until the clamor of buckets gave way to another kind of gathering. Rows of folding chairs creaked beneath worn jeans and sweat-soaked shirts. The sun bore down without mercy, and no one hoped for shade, only the occasional gust lifting dust between boots and clipboards. Behind the podium hung a sign in block letters, Water Rights and Land Reform Meeting, Silver Hollow. Mara stood just beyond the back row. She didn't sit, didn't wave, didn't pretend to belong. The dog had curled beside the wheel well of a maintenance trailer, half asleep, one eye open. Mara leaned against the fender and listened. At the front, Dorian Vexley adjusted his collar and raised a plastic bottle as if it were a chalice. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice polished by microphones and meetings. "This expansion, this drilling project is the only real way forward. Not just for me, for us." A murmur ran through the crowd, not agreement, but restlessness. A woman 2 rows in June Halbrook rose to her feet. "Huh?" Her voice cracked from dryness or fury. "Because last I checked, the parcels marked for resource access still belong to people who live here, who plant here, who remember what this place was before promises swallowed it." Applause rippled, hesitant but hungry. Dorian smiled the way men do when they believe they've already won. "We followed every code, every legal path. This isn't a seizure, it's progress. You sent Walt out with a clipboard and a badge to scare my mother into signing her land away. That's not progress." June didn't sit, eyes turned to Walt Danner's sheriff. Danner standing in full uniform, despite the heat, his thumb hooked through his belt like a man ready for a fight that never came. He didn't flinch. He only nodded the way you acknowledge a flat tire or a spilled cup of coffee. Mara's fingers brushed the folded paper in her coat edges, softened from being opened too often. A map hand-drawn, marked only with faded numbers, grid lines, and a single blue circle. She had never understood the meaning of that circle until Dorian spoke the name. Now, I understand some folks still cling to the past, he continued. But Rayner's project died with him, and no ghost of an engineer is going to stop this town from digging its own salvation. The air around Mara seemed to still. Rayner. No first name. No explanation. Just dropped like a stone in a well, and yet it struck something in her that hadn't shifted in years. She thought of the blueprint she had found in that old box, the one her husband studied once just before leaving that morning, the day he never came home. She thought of the single knock that came later that week, followed by silence. No body, no trace. Only a sealed envelope with her name on it tucked in a manila folder that smelled of copper and old paper. People no longer spoke of Rayner. His disappearance had become one of those unasked questions that kept the taps running. And here was Dorian, clean-shaven, sun-brown, using Rayner's name like punctuation in a sales pitch. People are tired of relying on a water rotation schedule based on who remembers whose birthday. We need a long-term solution. This is it. From the side, a man called out, "Whose land are you really drilling on?" Vexley avoided the question. New infrastructure creates new opportunities. That's how we rebuild. That land belonged to Rayner. June broke in. He was working on something better than this. For the first time, Danner moved. "Ma'am, we don't entertain conspiracy theories in these meetings." "Then maybe we should," she answered, "because what you call reform looks a lot like burial." Silence fractured across the gathering. Mara's hands trembled. She shoved them into her sleeves, the map still pressed against her side. She had almost forgotten it was there, though perhaps she had never stopped feeling its presence. She unfolded it slightly. Ink blurred at the corner just enough to reveal part of a name. Rain. She folded it again. The crowd began to rise. Meeting over questions unanswered, outrage packed away. Her throat ached with dryness, not only from the heat. The dog beside the trailer watched her. No begging, no blinking, just steady, as if it had heard everything and waited for her choice. She caught June's gaze across the chairs. The older woman looked worn, but she gave a small nod, subtle, weary, determined. Someone who still believed a fight mattered, even when it seemed long over. Mara turned toward the truck. The dog rose. Neither wagging nor barking, only ready. This time Mara stepped forward. Ash didn't wait for her. He moved with that same deliberate gait, limping just enough to mark time but never losing momentum. Mara followed through scrub and scattered mesquite, her boots pressing into cracked soil. Each step carried her farther from town, deeper into land people only mentioned when they spoke of ghosts. The cabin emerged past a low rise, little more than a wooden box swallowed by weeds. The roof sagged. A shutter banged lazily against the wind. Yet the porch floor, bare and neatly swept, stopped her. No dust, no leaves, no cobwebs across the doorframe. Ash stood at the bottom step, one paw lifted, nose tilted. The front door hung ajar, a narrow gap showing darkness inside. Mara drew a long breath. She knew this place. Rayner once let neighborhood kids pick wild grapes from the fence. Music loud and strange used to pour from the basement when he worked. No one spoke its name anymore. They just called it his place, as if saying it outright might wake something best left sleeping. Ash pushed the door. The door creaked sharp, almost theatrical, but held together hinges still too strong for a house abandoned so long. Mara stepped through. Light fell in crooked stripes across the floorboards. A table stood to one side beneath a yellowed cloth. The walls were bare, yet scrubbed clean. No trash. No nests. Someone had been here recently. The dog padded close, nose low, circling near the fireplace, before pausing at a wooden trapdoor, half hidden under a rolled rug. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Her gaze shifted instead to a stack of notebooks on the window ledge, dust-free and aligned as though someone had set them down, hesitated, then never returned. She lifted one. The cover peeled back with a sigh. Numbers, measurements, and then a single line of ink sharper than the rest, 40 feet. Flows underneath. Don't trust V. The V was underlined 3 times. Her mouth dried. She flipped through more pages, maps, terrain layers, pipe diagrams, groundwater tables. Notes rushed but precise, driven by urgency. The back door groaned. Mara froze. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, crunched over dead leaves outside. She shoved the notebook into her jacket and turned toward the sound. A figure appeared in the doorway. Short, broad-shouldered baseball cap pulled low over gray curls. June Halbrook. She didn't speak at once. Her eyes scanned the room, the papers, the dog before settling on Mara. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured. Mara offered no defense. June closed the door behind her. "I saw you leave the meeting. Figured you weren't just going home. I didn't mean to. I'm not here to scold you." The pause between them wasn't cold, only heavy with recognition. June crossed to the notebook's fingers, hovering before she picked up the one Mara hadn't touched. She flipped slowly. Her breath caught. Then she turned an open page toward Mara, tapping the same warning line. He was talking about Vexley. Mara leaned closer. "You think so, I don't guess," June said. "That's his hand. He rarely wrote full sentences, but when he did, he meant them." A breeze rattled dry branches. The dog gave a short, low growl. Mara's glance darted to the door. "Someone's been using this place," she said. June nodded. "Then we weren't the only ones who knew what he was working on." Ash nosed at the trap door. Faint scratch marks marred its edge. "We can't bring this to the council," June warned. "Not yet. I wasn't going to." Their eyes met. Both understood what went unsaid, that something buried here had been left hidden for a reason, but it would not stay hidden much longer. Mara edged back to the table, pulse hammering. She slid open a drawer, half expecting emptiness. Instead it caught, then gave with a dusty snap. Inside, beneath a coil of brittle wire and a cracked flashlight, something faintly gleamed. She reached in and drew out a small object crusted with grime. A USB drive. No label. Plastic chipped along one side. Long forgotten. She turned it over in her palm. Ash pricked his ears, shifted toward her, then sat facing the fireplace, tail still. Without a word, she slipped the drive into her jacket and cast one more glance at the trapdoor. Still shut. June had already left through the back, her warning louder than her steps. "Whatever's here, someone already knows you found it." The ride home passed in uneasy quiet, even the wind pausing at intersections. She parked 2 streets from her own place, instinct, not strategy. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Thin walls, warped porch steps. She latched the front door twice behind her. The living room had not changed, the same broken lamp, the same pile of unopened mail stacked like a monument to inaction. Ash circled once before settling near the window. Mara slid the USB into her old laptop, its screen smudged and flickering at the edges. The drive word revealing a single file on the desktop, Sonare log 3 MKV. She hesitated, then clicked. Static filled the screen before an image blinked into view. Rayner sat in what looked like the same cabin, the wall behind him, familiar light slanting across his shoulder. He appeared younger than she remembered, sweat on his brow, eyes darting with urgency more than fear. "If this reaches anyone," his voice low, "then I didn't make it out." He shifted, rubbing a hand down his jaw. "They'll claim I went rogue, that I falsified readings. But I didn't. I found the well. 40 feet down, steady flow, stable levels. It's real. They know it. That's why they want it buried." Ash lifted his head. Rayner stared straight into the camera. "They warned me if I released the location, they'd come for me." "That's not paranoia." Those were the words. "One of them signed my paycheck 2 days after threatening to turn off my lights permanently." He reached off screen and held up a page, the same circle and coordinates Mara had seen. "They want people to believe hope ran dry. That way they stay in line." The screen glitched. His image stuttered, then cut out. Mara sat, frozen fingers still on the keyboard. The dog gave a low huff and turned his gaze toward her. She snapped the laptop shut. Sleep never came. She lay on the worn couch, staring at the ceiling, while every groan of wood pressed too close. The dog kept his post until dawn. When she finally opened the front door, a cruiser rolled up. Sheriff Walt Danner stepped out, sunglasses, fixed in place, thumbs, hooked through his belt as always. His smile looked neighborly, like a man bringing pie, but forgetting the fork. "Morning, Miss Elwood," he called. "Just a routine check. Thought I'd confirm your boundary lines, city's updating records." "You got a minute?" Mara blinked. "Now doesn't take long." He leaned against the gate. "Better to get these things right before new drilling starts. Wouldn't want folks claiming what's not theirs." She moved halfway onto the porch, chest tightening. "You said this was routine." He nodded with practiced ease. One of those things no one notices until it matters. The dog slipped through the doorway to stand beside her. Danner's eyes flicked to him. That yours? She kept silent. He tapped his notebook. You still have that map your husband filed years back? Just curious. Her pulse hammered. No, she whispered. I don't think I do. He studied her a beat too long, then tipped his hat. All right. If you find it, let me know. Could help clear up some zoning confusion. With unhurried steps, he returned to the cruiser. The screen door groaned as Mara backed into the house and locked it twice. Later, June arrived through the back alley, her car hidden from view. They sat at the kitchen table with the laptop between them, the file unopened. You can't stay quiet, June said, but you also can't go loud. I don't know who to trust. That's the point, June whispered. You don't. Not yet. The dog paced to the corner, circled once, then dropped again. Mara looked at the drive in her palm, the plastic warmed by her skin. She slid it into her jacket pocket, already considering what had to be done by morning. At the market, egg carton, still warm from the coop, pressed against her arm. She handed over a crumpled $5 bill, nodding politely without meeting the vendor's eyes. Around her drifted talk of soil drought, canned peaches, but the familiar rhythm felt thin like a song played out of key. She lingered near the tomato crates, ash tied to a rusted pole, a few steps away, ears twitching at each passerby. Reaching for a basket of cucumbers, she felt a hand brush her shoulder. Too deliberate, too light for accident. Mara turned quickly. A man stood behind her, average in every possible way. Beige cap, plain shirt, a paper bag dangling from one hand like a stage prop. His face carried no memory, neither familiar nor strange. Simply forgettable. He never looked her square in the eye, only leaned close enough for his breath to touch her cheek. No one needs the dead engineer anymore, he whispered. Then he walked away. Not hurried, not hiding, just gone, absorbed into the slow tide of market bodies drifting between melons and jars of honey. Mara didn't give chase. Her legs locked, her fingers clenched around the basket handle, and her heartbeat thudded in her ears like boots on a wooden floor. She swept her gaze across the crowd, faces blank, movements ordinary. No one looked back. No one ran. Just neighbors and strangers brushing too close. Her hands trembled as she untied Ash. He neither barked nor whimpered, only kept his eyes fixed on the place where the man had vanished. They walked home in silence, groceries forgotten. A sharp wind carried fine red dust that settled over porches, windows, and fences like a warning left in plain sight. By the time her porch came into view, the phone buzzed in her pocket. From June, need you here. Urgent, no hesitation. She snatched the keys, turned back toward the truck, and Ash leapt into the bed without waiting for command. June's house crouched at the town's edge behind wild rose bushes. Today, though, the gate dangled open, latch bent, the screen door sagging on one hinge. Mara's stomach clenched before she'd even parked. Smoke and scorched plastic choked the air. June stood at the sink, arms wrapped tight as if bracing against an invisible quake. Her reddened eyes came not from tears, Mara realized, but from fumes. They were careful, June said flatly. Selective. The kitchen confirmed it. Drawers yanked out, cabinets flung open, a fire started or set on the stovetop. Char streaks clawed up the wall. In the trash bin, heaps of half-burnt paper smoldered with a faint hiss. They didn't want valuables, June continued. TV untouched. Cash jar, jewelry box. What they burned were papers. My binders. Your notes. Everything copied from Rayner. Mara said nothing. Her eyes found a fragile mound of ash, the remains of a ledger. The USB safe, June answered with a quick nod. I hid it in the church basement between the furnace pipes. Still there. I checked. Ash padded through the hallway, paws careful among broken glass. They were after the drive, Mara murmured. Or after you. The silence that followed felt heavy, layered, her fear stacked on June's. They're nervous, June muttered, which means we're close. That night, Mara sat at her kitchen table. The lights dimmed, the windows locked, her back stiff from exhaustion. The laptop stayed shut. She couldn't bring herself to watch the video again. Instead, she pulled out an old spiral notebook stained with rain and grocery lists. She began to write. Not only what the USB held, but everything: the meeting, the faceless man in the market, Danner's, visit the fire. Every name, every number, every instinct she had ignored. She wrote until the pen sputtered dry, then reached for another. When the stove clock blinked 1:43 a.m., her wrist throbbed and her eyes burned. but the words existed. That was enough. She wrapped the notebook in a plastic bag, slid it into an empty oatmeal canister, layered it with newspaper, and sealed the lid with duct tape. Ash shadowed her into the yard. The old chicken coop groaned as she lifted the hatch. The hens rustled but didn't rise. She pushed past feed sacks and a broken rake, wedging the canister beneath a loose plank. Straw covered the spot, the board pressed back into place. Ash settled by the door. This time, though, sleep never came. His ears twitched at every sound, body tense and watchful. Mara stayed awake too, staring at the ceiling. Before dawn, the dog slipped into the trees. Mara followed. Branches cracked ahead, first sharp, deliberate, then heavier. Not the wind. Something else. She froze, listening. No bird song. No insect hum. Even the cicadas were still. "Ash," she called. Nothing. Then a yelp, raw, unmistakable. She ran, ducking branches that tore her arms, stumbling over roots, nearly falling, before breaking into a clearing of hard-packed dirt. Ash lay crumpled on his side, a rusted steel jaw trap clamped around his front leg. Blood seeped dark into the soil, his paw twisted grotesquely. "Oh, God, Ash!" She dropped beside him, fumbling for the trap's levers. Rust bit into her palms, teeth jagged from decades of rot, but the spring had enough strength to close. Blood slicked her grip. Cursing, she braced her boot against the base and yanked. The jaws snapped apart with a shriek of metal. Ash panted shallowly, eyes half-lidded, no cry left in him. Tearing off her flannel, she bound the wound, knotting the fabric tight above the gash. Her hands moved with grim precision, practiced from too many injuries tended alone. When the bleeding slowed, her gaze caught on the collar, stiff with mud and burrs. She scraped the grime away. 3 letters surfaced, faint but undeniable: TR. Her chest clenched. Thad Rayner. It wasn't a tag, not decoration. The collar had been worn so long, the letters had sunk into the hide. This dog wasn't a stray that had stumbled upon her. He belonged to the man who vanished. "Ash," her whisper cracked. "You came back." He stayed still, eyes locked on hers, alert despite the pain. Lifting him took more muscle than she expected, heat and trembling weight pressed against her arms. The walk back dragged twice as long. No shortcuts, only her breath and the crunch of boots on dry leaves. Near town's edge, her phone buzzed. June come to the church, alone. She didn't stop at home. Adjusting Ash in her arms, she veered toward the chapel, legs burning under his weight. June waited at the basement door, sleeves rolled, flashlight wedged beneath her chin, a thick folder clutched to her chest. "I went through the sealed documents," she said without greeting. "The ones Rayner mailed to himself. They've been here for years." Mara set Ash gently on a folded blanket. June's gaze dropped to the collar, lingered. "What is that, his dog?" Mara murmured. "The initials are his." A long breath escaped June, slow as air leaking from a tire. He never left him, not even at the end. She passed over the folder. Inside lay geological reports, hand-drawn water maps, and a contract bearing 2 signatures, Thad Rayner and unmistakably Dorian Vexley. Vexley signed the first drilling study, June explained. He knew the aquifer ran deeper. He knew it cut under protected land. Rayner wanted it mapped clean, but that would have ended the project. So they buried it. Mara turned pages with shaking fingers. "This proves he was involved. It proves he had something to lose," June corrected softly, "and maybe something worse to hide. The rest depends on us." A car rolled past outside, slow headlights off, tires crunching gravel just long enough to notice. Both women fell silent. Later, in her own kitchen, Mara boiled water and poured it into a basin. She cleaned Ash's wound more gently this time, rewrapped it with fresh cloth. He whimpered but didn't resist. A bowl of broth sat at his side, a towel wedged beneath his good leg. Her gaze kept returning to the collar, now scrubbed clean, resting beside the laptop. Before it had been only words, names, timelines. Now the truth had flesh and breath, a witness who had limped back from whatever pit they tried to bury him in. She didn't pack a bag, didn't call for escape. Instead, she wrapped her thickest coat around Ash and curled beside him on the rug, hand resting against his ribs, following the rise and fall of his breath. She stayed like that until dawn bled through the curtains. By morning, the chicken coop leaned like it had surrendered. Sunlight pierced its cracked siding, the roof sagging beneath a nest of vines. Mara stood before it with hammer and half a box of nail sleeves shoved to her elbows. She hadn't touched this corner of the yard since before the fires. It had been easier to look away. But now with Ash stretched nearby on a worn quilt, eyes steady on her, she began again. Rotten panels came off one by one. Fresh planks cut from the shed replaced them. She sanded until her palms burned. Cedar dust mixed with citrus oil she used to keep termites out. Birds kept their distance, but a lone robin claimed a branch and chirped twice, sharp insistent. Ash lifted his head ears, twitching. By midday sunlight carved hard shadows across the yard. Sweat slicked her back as she planted a row of radishes beside her grandmother's old squash bed, pressing seeds into damp soil with her thumb. The rhythm steadied her. When evening came, she carried Ash back to the house and found a folded note beneath the screen door. Don't forget what silence costs. No signature. She kept it to herself when June arrived with a pie tin and a bottle of wine. Brought dinner, June announced, slipping past the doorway. And don't argue, I know the fridge only holds pickles and batteries. Mara set the table without protest, even lit the old citronella candle from the porch. A dusty Bluetooth speaker crooned faint country blues, the kind her mother used to hum while folding laundry. They ate slowly fried catfish store-bought rolls. Pie too sweet but welcome. You know, June mused, tilting her glass toward the window. This place feels warmer now, like someone actually lives here. Mara didn't reply, but the words lingered longer than the music. Later, she powered on the laptop. The USB had taken hours to decode, but one file had been partially restored. The screen flickered. Rayner appeared behind the wheel of his car, sweat on his brow, eyes darting between the road and rearview mirror. They want to bury it, he whispered. Not the water, the truth. His grip tightened on the wheel. If you're watching this, it means they know I'm close. Headlights flared through the windshield, steady too close. The image jolted as though the dash camera had slipped. In the frozen corner of the frame, Mara saw it, a dented silver bumper, a cracked right headlight. It was Walt Danner's truck. From the couch, Ash gave a faint huff. Mara glanced over. He hadn't moved, only kept his eyes open, watching her. The next morning brought Water Heritage Day. Main Street gleamed with paper streamers and banners reading, Honor the Source. Children paraded in droplet costumes while a brass band stumbled through This Land Is Your Land. Mara threaded slowly through the crowd beneath the merciless blue sky. Booths offered hand-cranked lemonade pins, shaped like water drops, temporary tattoos of the reservoir. Everything felt staged, brittle, a celebration draped in bunting to disguise a lie. June drifted near the fountain, pretending to browse soaps. They're putting up the new mural, she whispered, gaze fixed on the stage. Wait until you see who's front and center. The mayor took the microphone, face flushed. Today we honor not just our history, but those who ensure our future stays strong and flowing. The tarp dropped. Larger than life, Dory and Vexley shaking hands with the mayor, laughter painted across their faces, a glowing water tower behind them. Suits, immaculate shoes polished, smiles unbroken, untouched by blood, by ruin, by truth. Mara's stomach lurched. A deliberate bump jostled her arm. A man in a neat button-down, no name tag, no booth leaned close. Miss Elwood, he murmured. Curiosity can be unwise. Before she could react, he was gone, absorbed by the crowd. Her fingers curled around her phone, but she didn't lift it. Music swelled again, laughter rippling across the plaza, fireworks, even in daylight. At her feet, Ash sat, rigid, ears pressed flat. She turned back toward the mural. That smile on Vexley's face, the same as in Rayner's video, but here fixed immune. A gust tore one of the paper flags from its string. It whipped against a lamppost, fought free, then sailed off. Mara bent to touch Ash's head, startled at the heat of his skin. She tightened her hold on the collar and headed for home. Hours passed and he hadn't lifted his head. Breath shallow, irregular, a soft wheeze between exhales. Mara crouched beside him on the kitchen floor, quilt soaked from compresses she kept changing. Damp fur clung to his ribs, the fever refusing to break. She checked his gums, pale pink, nearly white. The house reeked faintly of smoke. Even with the windows thrown open, the sour tang lingered. In the shed, a scorched metal cabinet sagged, plastic melted like wax. Everything she had stored, backup photos, transcripts, water maps destroyed. She had believed steel and padlocks could withstand fire. Now only ash remained. She hadn't cried. Not when she found the flames, not while she beat them out with her jacket, not even when blisters rose on her fingertips. But as she knelt beside Ash, dipping another rag into the last of the cool water, something inside cracked. The radio's cheerful music cut away to a live feed. Her stomach nodded. And this morning at Silver Hollow Town Hall, Dorian Vexley officially announced his company's purchase of the Western Aquifer Development Zone, formerly known as the Rainer Tract. Mara stared at the speaker as if it had cursed her. She stood, pulled out her phone, and opened the live stream. The image sharpened a polished stage press from county and state banners blaring, "A future that flows." Vexley stood beaming, clean-shaven, the mayor clapping like a proud rooster. The camera swept the audience, business owners, market vendors, officials. Cheers, applause, confetti. As of today, Vexley proclaimed, "We begin sustainable drilling in Zone A with county support. Cleaner water economic renewal, long overdue independence for Silver Hollow." Questions rose from reporters, but none cut sharp. No one mentioned Rainer. No one spoke of the fire. No one asked about Ash or the missing map. Mara sank into a chair. A ragged cough broke from Ash, a bark so weak it sounded more like a plea. She dropped to the floor, cradling his head. "Hang on. Just hang on." His eyes opened halfway, cloudy and unfocused, yet they found hers and held for a moment before sliding shut again. The broadcast closed to a standing ovation. She switched off her phone and hurled it across the room. It landed on the carpet with a soft thud intact. She wished it had shattered. Everything about the moment felt obscene, her dog burning with fever, while the man who orchestrated a disappearance stood lauded with lemon bars and campaign banners, the town cheering like salvation had arrived. Barefoot, she stepped into the yard. Wind cut against her skin, the shed still stinking of melted wire and insulation. She crouched among the wreckage, a single scrap, a corner of a page curled under a charred bolt. She lifted it carefully. Nothing legible. The edges disintegrated at her touch. From the house came the soft ping of her laptop powering up. She rushed back in. The machine had auto-synced with her old cloud account. Only one file appeared, an audio clip. She pressed play. Rainer's voice filled the kitchen, low and urgent, as though spoken from a car. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it back." The sound of gravel crunching beneath tires, a turn signal clicking in the background. "I left the last coordinates on the ledger. But don't trust the permit." Vexley doctored the numbers. The audio cut out. No end. Mara sat in the stillness that followed. Ash whimpered from the kitchen, a sharp, fragile sound that split her anger like thunder breaking dry fields. She knelt beside him, fingers brushing along his head. "I'm still here," she whispered. A soft thump struck the window. A flyer, bright blue and half-torn, caught in the wind. She didn't rise to remove it. When June called the next morning, Mara didn't hesitate. She left Ash curled in his blanket and followed her to the church. Dust clung in the basement like memory, quiet, patient waiting. The thin beam from June's flashlight cut across stacks of forgotten records. Air felt unmoving, and the filing cabinets groaned under their rust. "I think this was the floodplain section," June whispered, brushing cobwebs from faded stickers. Her hand paused above a drawer marked 1974, 1989, infrastructure. Mara stood, close hands buried in her coat pockets, heart racing, since Ash's fever spiked that morning. The world seemed strung, taut, fragile as thread. The drawer opened with a grunt, revealing warped folders. June flipped carefully, murmuring names. Then with a hush, she drew out a leather-bound notebook, edges chewed by silverfish rubber band brittle. Pages opened to reveal diagrams, maps, figures scribbled with engineers' precision flow rates, gradients, water tables. Mara leaned in. A hand-drawn grid spanned 2 pages, 3 points circled in red. Beneath one, Rainer had written 43 feet east, unregulated vein, fastest flow, keep off record. At the bottom, next to a form labeled Drilling Safety Waiver, a pencil signature appeared faintly, W. Danner. Mara staggered back, knees knocking against a stool. He signed it. He knew. June turned another page. There's more. Entries recorded, objections, each dated. One read DV, overriding delays, pushing shallow access. Claims no one will know. Another 2 weeks before Rainer vanished. If you find this, follow the water. Don't trust anyone tied to permits. Mara gripped the filing cabinet's edge, pulse roaring in her ears. The walls themselves seemed to hum. They had proof, real proof. For a moment it filled her like air after drowning, then came the weight. If she showed it, would she vanish too? Later that afternoon, she slipped into the poorhouse for 10 minutes. 2 black coffees, 1 lemon scone. The instant the door opened, she sensed it. Conversations dipped. Chairs scraped. A spoon clinked too deliberately. Head down, she approached the counter. The woman there, once a fellow school board volunteer, smiled thinly. "Morning. 2 coffees, please," Mara said. Behind her, a whisper. "She's been off since her husband." Another voice. "Didn't you hear she was in a facility after he died?" A third talks to herself, wanders at night, her fists clenched in her pockets. The chalkboard menu blurred. Heat crawled her neck, not shame, not confusion, but rage, heavy and silent. The coffee arrived. No chatter, no eye contact. She left feeling every step tracked. In the alley, June waited in her old Dodge engine low. She rolled the window as Mara climbed in. "They've started the smear," she said. Mara handed over the cup. "I noticed. They're calling your old colleagues, saying you've got a record, filed noise complaints. That grief made you unstable. They're painting me as the crazy widow. They're discrediting you before you speak." Mara stayed quiet. That evening, Ash still burned with fever. She sat on the floor beside him, knees stiff, rubbing his ears gently. His breath was thin but steady. The knock came just after 7. Sheriff Danner stood beneath the porch light, hat in hand, a figure dredged from nightmare. His face sagged with weariness, but no kindness touched it. "I'm here to deliver this formally," he said, holding out an envelope. Mara didn't move. "You're summoned before the Oversight Committee next week," he continued. "Defamation, obstruction, public endangerment." She gave no reply. Danner dipped his head once. "This isn't personal. You should think about legal counsel." From the hallway came a low growl. His eyes shifted toward the sound. Mara reached for the envelope and shut the door. She closed the door without another word and turned the lock with both hands. For a long while she stood still, listening to the cruiser fade down the road, the envelope clenched in her fist. The first drops touched her knuckles like quiet questions, cold, tentative, the kind of rain Silver Hollow hadn't seen in weeks. Mara didn't flinch. She lowered herself cross-legged into the dirt behind the house, back resting against warped siding, a wool blanket draped across her shoulders, offering little against the chill. Fingers traced the brittle edge of Rayner's map, its ink already smudged where damp had seeped through. Ash lay wrapped in her old flannel, shallow breaths, rising and falling under the fabric. Every so often, one ear twitched, but he hadn't stirred since sunset. In the kitchen, the yellow lamp stayed on. June had made lentil soup and promised to sleep on the couch just in case. But Mara couldn't bring herself to step back in yet. The air out here tasted cleaner, damp sagebrush, charred pine, and Ash's fur carrying both. Rain slid down her neck. Beyond the ridgeline, thunder muttered hesitant, as if the storm doubted its place. She scanned the map again. Flow paths, elevation lines, hurried notations. Always her eyes returned to the corner, to the final line in Rayner's print. "If you find this, trust only the water." Memory pulled her backward the night Eli disappeared. A knock at the door. Danner, standing in her kitchen badge, tilted just so his voice smooth. "Hikers go missing all the time. The desert takes what it wants." He'd even set a warm hand on her shoulder. She had believed him, thanked him. Then spent 93 days walking every trail wash and coyote path she could find. Nothing. Not a shoelace. Not a footprint. Now she knew why. Turning the map over, she found the back blank bare and expectant like a headstone. She fetched the pen she kept tucked behind the spice rack and pressed its tip to the page. "If I don't make it, give this to the council. Don't trust local law. The signatures are real. The water is real. My name is Mara Elwood." I did not lie. Ink bled greedily into the paper. She folded the sheet in thirds, slow and even, and slipped it into the inner pocket of her jacket, the one where Eli's faded bandana still rested, frayed and soft as old denim. Her fingers brushed it once before zipping the pocket shut. The screen door creaked. "I've got a cousin in Albuquerque," June said, stepping barefoot into the mud robe tugged by the wind. "You could go. Just for a while. Let things settle." Mara kept her gaze on the tree line. He's got acreage, June went on. Dogs, chickens. He won't ask questions. I know. You'd be safe there. Safe or invisible? Silence lingered until June answered softly. Maybe both. The rain thickened. Somewhere close a branch snapped. Ash stirred groaning, shifting nearer to Mara's thigh. I used to think staying quiet meant survival, June murmured. That if I kept my head down, they'd leave me be. But they never do, Mara said. No, they just move closer. Mara drew a long breath. The air carried the scent of smoke, rinsed from the walls, and something deeper like hope buried beneath 6 feet of dust. I thought about leaving, she admitted, when they burned the records, when they called me a liar. But then Ash came back. He never gave up. I don't think he knows how. She glanced down. His eyes, though tired, stayed on her steady, unbroken. They're unveiling the drilling rights on Founders Day, June reminded. Dorian will have the stage, the press, even the governor's rep. Then I'll need a seat at the table. Mara rose, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Rain soaked her sleeves, but she didn't care. At the shed's edge, she pried up loose boards and drew out a cigar box. Inside waited a thumb drive, 2 matchbooks, and an envelope she had never opened until now. It was addressed in Eli's handwriting. She hesitated, slipped it into her jacket. Then she looked toward the old bucket beneath the broken gutter. Rainwater filled it to the brim, and still falling. By morning the storm had cleared, and the town square was already dressing itself for ceremony. The folding chairs shimmered in the late morning heat, white plastic boughs, crisp against dull metal. A stage rose a few inches above the square-painted plywood disguised by burgundy drapery. Flags flapped behind the podium, and on the banner overhead the slogan gleamed, "Water for the Future, a Silver Hollow Initiative." Mara stood near the third row, hands sunk deep in the pockets of her corduroy jacket. The air smelled of powdered lemonade and varnish. She spotted June among the press cluster, flanked by 2 choir-board women, but no one approached her. Then Vexley stepped to the microphone, his voice rolling smooth and warm, polished like a salesman at a funeral. Today we welcome a new era of prosperity, proof that resilience, hard work, and honest vision still thrive in the American West. Polite applause scattered like dry husks. Mara stayed still. Her fingers traced the shape of the drive hidden beneath her shirt, the string pressing into her collarbone. Ash rested in the shade of a water truck tail, twitching eyes half-lidded, yet alert. She moved forward just as Vexley raised a silver-plated shovel. "Let the inaugural dig begin." "No." The word carried sharper than she expected. Mid-smile, he froze. Heads turned. Mara climbed the 2 wooden steps, brushing past a councilman's elbow. Rainwater still stained her boots, dust clung to the hem of her jeans from Eli's trail. She gripped the mic. "This land is poisoned, not chemically, morally, and it didn't happen by accident." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Walt Danner rose from the front row, hand inching toward his belt, too slow to act without exposing himself. "Ma'am, this isn't the place." "No, Sheriff. This is exactly the place." She didn't meet his eyes. Vexley leaned in. "Mara, you've made your point. Let's not embarrass anyone here. You buried a man who tried to warn us. That's a serious accusation from someone with no credibility." Chuckles broke out. A voice from the back jeered. "That the widow who talks to her dog," her blink steadied her. "You don't want to listen, fine. But someone will." She faced the rows of folding chairs. "Ask why every map of this town omits the eastern aquifer. Ask who gains when Rainer Thad is erased." Murmurs grew louder. Phones lifted. "You're grieving," Vexley pressed. "And grief turns to obsession when left untreated." "Obsessed with what water truth?" he gestured. "Security." A deputy began moving closer, not aggressive, just enough to frame her as an intruder. "You're not just stealing water," she said, ignoring him. "You're rewriting who matters, who gets to stay, who gets to live." He leaned toward the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. You dug up a well, I dug up the past." That line hung like a blade, because it still bleeds. The air shifted, small but undeniable. Near the vendor booths, a boy raised his phone recording. Mara found June's gaze. The older woman gave the faintest nod. Someone hissed, "You should be ashamed." Another voice shouted, "She's dangerous." She turned toward the noise but couldn't find the face. Danner raised his hand. Ash howled. Not a bark, not a whimper. Something raw and mournful cutting through the brittle heat like a wound-made sound. The cry cracked, lingered, then faded into silence so heavy it swallowed everything. Even the microphones carried it. Vexley's face tightened. Cameras pivoted. Mara touched her collarbone, pulled the string free, and lifted the drive into sunlight, its edge gleaming like evidence too bright to deny. The crowd stilled. She stepped down from the stage device still in hand. The boy with the phone kept recording, his other hand trembling. Ash limped forward to meet her. She didn't speak, just walked past the first row, past security, past the water truck, whose side panels reflected them all like ghosts. The boy had already set his laptop on a crate, fingers fumbling as the screen flickered to life. A single shaky beam of light struck the makeshift screen. Dust caught in the projector's glow, dancing like ghost ash in the air. People murmured, confused at first, then grew still as the video loaded. Mara stood at the edge of the square, the USB no longer in her hand but running on the boy's laptop, the same one that had streamed her confrontation. She watched him double-click the encrypted file, the one she'd cracked 2 nights earlier, with June's old password, resistwater12. Ash leaned into her leg ribs, hot against her calf ears, twitching though he stayed still. The video flickered alive. A fixed shot, grainy but clear. Rayner sat at a table, sweat streaking his face, glasses slipping. No sound at first, only the hiss of the microphone sinking. Then his voice came through, breaking. If you're seeing this, then the papers didn't do enough. I tried to warn you. A gasp from the back. The crowd stiffened. Mara's chest tightened. The frame widened. Another figure stepped into view, taller, broad-shouldered, stiff in movement, as if he despised the lens. Sheriff Walt Danner. Whispers rose like surf. On screen, Rayner slid a folder across the table. This is the aquifer chart. Geological anomaly. It cuts under town and pushes east. You didn't see this, Danner muttered. You know damn well I did. The sheriff exhaled hard, then drew an envelope from his jacket, thick, stuffed with bills visible through thin paper. You want to keep your wife's health insurance. You hand over the originals. Rayner didn't move toward it. You're on the wrong side of this, Walt. A hand slammed the table. You think I like this? You think I want to babysit Vexley's vanity projects while you play the saint? And then Rayner's voice low and bitter. I hope to God someone buries you with this tape. The screen cut to black. Gasps tore through the square like banners ripped by wind. Before silence took hold, Danner forced his way through the front row, blotched red sweat blooming across his brow like oil on concrete. You little! His hand lunged for the laptop. Mara stepped between him and the boy. The deputy hesitated, watching Danner's raised arm, too slow to intercept. Ash barked. Sharp, gunshot loud. People recoiled. The projector still glowed frozen on Rayner's last frame. Danner's fingers grazed Mara's shoulder. She staggered but stood her ground. You don't get to erase this, she snapped. His swing came again, clumsy with rage. The deputy cut in. Sheriff, he said, voice flat. That's enough. Danner bared his teeth. Don't you dare. I saw the same footage, the deputy replied, jaw tight. Back off. Gasps again. Phones lifted. Someone kept recording. Danner snarled, I've been doing this job since before you were shaving, Donnelly. You've been hiding behind that badge long enough. Then came the softest sound, metal unsnapping. The badge came off his chest like a weight dropping. Donnelly held it in his palm, then stepped forward and handed it to a stunned town supervisor standing near the crowd's edge. Danner froze, speechless. Farther back, Vexley adjusted his cufflinks, descended 1 step from the stage, and angled toward the exit by the water trucks. His lips stayed sealed. Mara didn't celebrate. She couldn't. Dirt clung to her trembling hands as she brushed them against her jeans. Ash nudged her calf. Her fingers dropped automatically to scratch the spot between his ears. The screen blinked dark. Someone pulled the plug. The boy with the laptop lifted his head toward her, waiting. Mara's hand reached for the drive but froze midway. A glint of silver at the back of the crowd caught her breath. Not a weapon. A pen. June Halbrook stood tall, arms crossed, offering a single nod. The drive slipped back into Mara's pocket just as the first siren wailed in the distance. By the time uniforms began swarming the square, she was already striding toward the fields. The shovel struck the ground with a dull thunk, barely denting the cracked surface. Sweat slid down her temple as she wiped her brow with her wrist. Eyes narrowed against the dry wind. Ash rested in the shade of an old pickup, breathing slow but steady, a red handkerchief tied around his neck. He didn't bark anymore, only watched. Around her hands moved older men with stiff joints, teenage girls with chipped nails, young fathers with sunburned shoulders. The youngest boy, no more than 10, gripped a gardening spade as if it were holy. The dead land wasn't dead at all, only buried. June had said it the night before, quiet but steady. We don't win because we speak louder, Mara. We win because we don't quit. The phrase had circled her mind all morning, stronger than any chant. A phone beeped. One of the boys with a GoPro murmured, "Over 2,000 live." Mara didn't glance up. She pressed the blade again. This time the earth yielded softer beneath the crust. She nodded to the woman beside her, and together they widened the cut. Footsteps crunched on gravel. At the fence line, 2 engineers from Vexley's team stood with arms crossed, one clutching a clipboard, the other a camera he never raised. Behind them, a sheriff's truck idled its engine, humming like threat. No one stepped forward. Not yet. The digging went deeper. A cooler draft stirred. From the pit's edge, someone called, "Smells different down here." She caught it too wet mineral stone, the faint promise below. "Keep going," urged the boy, streaming. Tools appeared, a pail, a crowbar. A narrow trench opened, just wide enough to crouch within. Red dirt clung to their palms like blood. Mira barely noticed. Muscles burned back, aching, still she dug. Ash gave a bark, weak, hoarse, but alive. The crowd swelled. Familiar faces first, then dozens more. Some carried thermoses, claws, metal pans. Others brought nothing but questions. What are they doing? Digging where the map pointed. Could it be real? Rayner wasn't wrong. The live streamer tilted his phone outward. "The town's watching now," he whispered. "So's the state." Mara dropped to her knees, clawing through compacted dust with bare hands. Fingernails split. She kept at it. Something shifted. A hollow crack. She froze. Silence followed. Then a sound soft as breathwater kissing stone. A glug, then another. Her hand pressed down. Mud smeared her fingers when she pulled back, trembling. The crowd surged closer. Someone cried. "Bring a pump," a boy shouted. None appeared, but a ladle did. Then a tin mug. A soup pot. Each passed down as if carrying gold. The first container rose heavy and full, murky, red-tinged but cold. A woman dipped her fingers. "It's wet." That was enough. A cheer swelled, not deafening, but unstoppable, rolling across the dusty field, spilling onto gravel roads, reaching the bar, where the whispers had first turned against Mara. Phones rose. Shutters clicked. As if summoned by truth itself, people arrived carrying shovels, buckets, ropes, lanterns. Even a child with a plastic beach pail. June stood at the fence line, arms folded. No smile touched her lips, but she was solid as bedrock. A reporter shoved through the crowd, thrusting forward a mic. Mara ignored her, dropped back into the hole, and scraped at the next layer. The soil bled red, soaked through. Water now trickled visibly, a steady bead gathering in the rough basin. She cupped her hand, drank, and tasted iron. Ash barked louder this time. The crowd pressed closer. By the time the pit deepened, she was standing ankle-deep in mud boots abandoned at the edge. It wasn't the geyser people imagined when they whispered about miracles. The water came quiet, slow, almost apologetic, as if it had been waiting all along for someone to ask gently. Lowering to her knees, she dipped her hands into the thin stream. The cold slid across her skin, silky, tugging bits of soil away. It smelled of iron, old wood, something deeper alive. No applause, no parade. Only the scrape of metal on stone, the thump of palms scooping wet earth, the hushed disbelief of people watching water where dust had ruled. She neither smiled nor wept. She only rinsed the red from her hands, slow and deliberate. This was never about victory, it was about proving the effort mattered. Ash curled in a patch of shade nearby body, rising and falling with shallow breaths. His tail flicked once as if in recognition. No bark this time. He didn't need to. Across the lot, a man hammered a sign into the ground. Letters still smudged from morning mist read, "Rayner Well, community owned." June stood behind him, arms folded, watching as if it were both headstone and beginning. Her shawl fluttered in the wind face carved from stone. More people arrived on foot in pickups, hauling wagons stacked with tubs and dented milk jugs. Some came quietly. Others laughed through disbelief. A few carried sandwiches or jars of pickles. One elderly woman offered hot coffee in mismatched mugs. No one issued orders. None were needed. By noon, camera crews had returned, more orderly now, no longer shadowing Vexley but following the town. Reporters stood in the mud, microphones dangling, unsure whether to film or simply pull off their shoes. Her back ached as she stepped away from the dig. The sun had burned through morning haze, tilting the whole town toward a brighter angle. She crossed the courtyard, where not long ago Vexley had stood with the mayor beneath banners, promising salvation through steel and money. Those banners were gone, cords limp from poles. The folded fabric lay neatly on a bench, its colors darkened by rain. Cool air hummed in the town hall. Her damp footprints marked the linoleum as she moved toward the bulletin board. Fresh notices hung there, ink still sharp. Water license, 406 Essentiel. Revoked. Applicant Dorian Vexley. Effective immediately. Beneath it, temporary custody. Walter Danner under investigation, pending federal review. She stared until a clerk's voice drew her back. Miss Elwood. A young woman held out an unmarked envelope. This was dropped off for you. No name. Mara nodded, took it, and stepped into the sun again. The heat pressed close, but lighter than before, almost playful in the breeze. Behind the building beneath the elm where she'd once waited alone, she opened the envelope. One sheet neatly folded. Thank you. Rayner didn't die for nothing. No signature, no sender. Only those words. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed hard. Tears didn't belong here. Not now. Ash had dragged himself nearer, resting in the tree's shadow. His ears twitched, eyes calm, breathing steadier. She crouched, pressed her forehead gently to his. I know, she whispered. We're not done. A truck rumbled over the ridge tires, crunching gravel. More townsfolk, more buckets. A boy lugged a kiddie pool. Another balanced a laundry basket lined with tarp. Mara straightened, brushed dirt from her knees. No wave, no explanation. She stepped back toward the pit, past a coil of rope and discarded gloves. Lifting a spade, she dragged its edge across the soil and pointed to the low dip ahead. They should dig here next. The others bent back to their work, and Mara let the scrape of shovels and voices fade as she finally turned home. The house held a quiet, not heavy, but patient settling, like dust after a storm. Evening light slanted through a torn curtain, catching on the bookshelf corner, where a worn journal waited. Cross-legged on the floor beside the bed, she faced the uneven mattress slumped toward the wall frame, bent from years of neglect. The room hadn't been touched in months, maybe longer. His boots still rested under the chair. His windbreaker hung on the hook. The lamp beside her clicked faintly as it cooled. Her fingers traced the cracked leather cover spine, softened by too many readings. She had opened it hundreds of times since he vanished, hoping one line might shift meaning. Tonight she wasn't searching, only holding. The last page he marked lay blank. No words, only yellowing paper with a faint crease down the center, as if once folded carried reconsidered. Her breath caught, but no tears came. He hadn't written because he hadn't needed to. The emptiness wasn't absence. It was trust. Space left for her, to choose, to continue. Her head bent against the journal, and the weight she'd carried, the regret, the furious wishing she had stopped him, began to shift. He had left with purpose, believing someone needed to see it through. He hadn't dragged her into it because he believed she could outlast him. You knew I'd find the rest, didn't you? She whispered. The wind stirred a branch, tapping gently at the window frame. A sound that once startled her now meant only that the tree was alive. Ash lay curled near the front door, still as stone. He hadn't moved much since midday, only lifted his head when feet passed the gate or the hens gargled in the dark. This half-wild animal had claimed her porch as home. He gave no reaction to a distant bark. None when the bell tower chimed. Not even when the wind rattled shingles. It was the first night he slept without vigilance. Drawing a blanket over her legs, Mara leaned against the wall. The wood felt cool but firm. She traced a crack in the grain, a crooked line vanishing behind the dresser. That was how the past felt now, bent but traceable. Her mind replayed the night her husband left, not the whole reel, just his hand on her back, the way he spoke her name like a promise. She used to lie awake thinking she should have stopped him. Now she saw different. He had trusted her with the part unfinished. The blank page was not goodbye or confession, it was here, your turn. The journal lay open beside her, pages rustling in the draft. She left it that way. Eventually she would need real rest, not collapse from exhaustion, but sleep that allowed the soul to release for a few hours. She listened. No footsteps on gravel, no fist against the door, no engine prowling with false headlights. Ash never stirred. Her eyelids lowered, breath, slowing the ache in her chest, softening. There would be more fights, more proof to gather. But tonight no boots pressed the threshold. No reason to keep checking the lock. You can rest now, she murmured. Whether meant for Ash, for herself, or for the man who never returned, it didn't matter. No knock came. None was needed. By morning she was on her feet again, walking into town as the council called its meeting. The chairs in the hall creaked like old knees. The ceiling fan still turned slow as molasses. Paint peeled above the entrance, showing pale blues beneath faded beige. Yet no one cared, not now. She sat near the back, fingers wrapped around a pen she wasn't using. Her name had just been spoken aloud, clear, respectful, public. Ms. Elwood, the new moderator, said, adjusting his glasses. Would you like to speak now that the floor is open? Months ago she would have pretended not to hear. But the room looked different. No guard at the door, no glances of warning, only the low buzz of a crowd willing to listen. She rose slowly, the scrape of her chair echoing. Ash curled beneath the table, lifted his head. Ears twitched, but he stayed calm. Not every movement meant danger anymore. I don't have a speech, she said evenly. Just a thank you. Not for me, but for anyone who dug with their hands, who stood up when sitting would have been easier. Heads nodded. One woman wiped her eyes behind glasses. I don't know what comes next, Mara went on. But I do know this, the well belongs to no one. That's the point. It belongs to everyone, or it dries. When she sat, the room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The silence afterward carried more weight than clapping ever could. After the meeting, people lingered. A man in overalls handed her a folded blueprint, found this in the shed might be useful. A teenager who once live-streamed her clash with Danner gave a shy wave. June, 3 rows ahead, waited until the hall emptied. They didn't speak at once. June's umbrella dangled from her wrist unopened. Her coat smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. You kept it standing, she said. I figured someone younger should hold the key now. From her pocket came an old brass key, edges worn smooth from years of use and neglect. Mara studied it before taking it into her palm. The weight was slight, yet it landed like something final. You sure, she asked. Lines deepened at the corners of June's smile. I've been sure a while. Took me longer to admit it. They walked out together. The door clattered behind them, not locked, only closed. Rain hung in the air, rich with petrichor. Droplets fell in soft lines, gentle enough not to drench, steady enough to matter. Sky given, not piped or sold. At the bottom step, Ash waited, fur, damp nose lifted, as if listening to the clouds. Mara brushed her hand across his head. He didn't flinch. A breeze tugged at her jacket, lifting the lapels like an invitation. She let it. The town seemed quieter under the weather, less engine noise, fewer shouts, just the hush of water striking dirt rooftops' leaves. Beyond the lot where Vexley's banners once hung, a new sign stood. Hand-painted letters declared rain or well. Community held. No names beneath, no logos. Only a choice that water should flow to anyone who needed it. The brass key rested in her pocket, pressed against Rayner's blank page she had never thrown away. June opened her umbrella, maybe from habit. Mara didn't. She let the rain find her. They didn't talk on the walk, but something passed between them. Release or maybe relief. Ash padded 3 steps behind, limp, barely visible now. Gravel crunched, then softened as they reached the muddy path curving toward home. Showers that planted things were rare in Silver Hollow. This time no one prayed for them, no one tried to catch them in barrels. The water simply came unasked, unclaimed, and for once that was enough. By week's end, those same rains left their mark, greening places long thought barren. Behind the old church, the ground no longer looked abandoned. Raised garden beds framed by scrap wood hugged the soil in neat rows. A new awning stretched between poles shading barrels that caught runoff from the gutter. The place buzzed softly, not with generators or protest chants, but with laughter. Children dashed barefoot across grass unseen for years. Someone strung a bright scarf on the clothesline, and Ash chased it as if it were a rabbit spun from wind. His gait still favored the right side, but he ran, truly ran. Beneath the modest roof, Mara wiped soil from her jeans after patching the last corner of a planter box. Her gaze drifted toward the well now sealed in stone, its wooden cover bearing a plaque freshly carved keeper of the well, Mara Elwood. No one had asked her permission before placing it there. That was what made it matter. She hadn't known what to say that morning. June had only smiled and whispered, it was overdue. Now watching a boy lean over the rim to drop a pebble just to hear the splash, something shifted. The fear that once kept her small no longer pressed so heavy. People didn't whisper behind her back anymore. They greeted her by name. No one said widow, no one said crazy, just Mara. She crossed the yard, slowly pausing to water a bed of mint spreading wider than expected. A girl wrinkled her nose and asked about the smell. Mara grinned. That's iced tea in July. You'll see. The child giggled and ran off. Near the well, a hopscotch grid lay chalked on the slab, tiny footprints, overlapping like faded memories. Her hand rested on the rim. The wood was warm under her palm grain, marked by faint grooves where stormwater once trickled and dried. She remembered standing there once with fists clenched, certain nothing would grow again, neither in her nor in the town. A breeze stirred the hair at her neck. Behind her, laughter swelled. Mara. She turned. A boy of 12, knees skinned, grin crooked, waved from across the clearing. It's your turn, adults versus kids relay? Ash barked, tail sweeping dust in agreement. She raised an eyebrow. You sure you want that smoke? He laughed. Bring it. Rolling up her sleeves, Mara stepped away from the well. The children parted, forming crooked lines. Someone handed her the scarf Ash had chased earlier, now a makeshift baton. From a picnic table, an old radio spilled music slightly off-key, and no one cared. Ash trotted beside her, tongue out like he'd appointed himself team mascot. A girl patted his head without asking first, and he didn't flinch. Mara crouched low, scarf in hand. All right, she said, glancing sideways at her teammates. Let's make 'em earn it. The signal came, a hand dropping a shout, and she launched forward. The ground no longer felt like something to fear. It held her steady and sure with every step. Cheers rang out behind her. Someone whistled. The sun hit her face just right. She laughed without meaning to. At the halfway mark, she passed the scarf to a teenager with purple shoelaces and fell back breathless but beaming. She bent to catch her breath, hands on her thighs, then straightened. Ash was waiting with his tongue lolling and eyes bright. He wagged his tail once before trotting toward the well, flopping next to it like a sentry at ease. Mara followed, wiping her forehead. She looked around at the kids chasing each other, the adults pretending not to be out of breath, the plants stretching toward sunlight. Then she looked down into the well. Nothing about it shimmered or glowed. It didn't whisper secrets or hide mysteries anymore. It just held water. And that was enough. She pressed her palm once more against the rim, solid, steady hers, only in the way that anything truly shared can be. Behind her, someone called again. Come on, Mara, you gotta cheer. She turned, lips curling. Ash barked once, sharp, joyful. Mara jogged back into the sun. In a town where silence once meant safety, one woman proved that truth, even buried beneath layers of dirt, lies, and grief can still rise. Mara didn't start as a hero. She simply refused to let fear decide her story. And maybe that's what healing really is, not forgetting the pain, but choosing to plant something new in the space it left behind. If this story moved, you make sure to follow the channel. More emotional stories like this are waiting to be uncovered.